Imagine you're at a peaceful zoo, enjoying your day, when suddenly chaos erupts as someone is pushed into a polar bear's territory. Or picture a serene hiking trip turning into a fight for survival when a grizzly bear charges at a group of seniors. These terrifying moments show just how quickly nature can turn deadly. In today's stories, we'll dive into shocking incidents where humans come face to face with wild animals, from a daring rescue in a polar bear enclosure to a wildlife photographer's fatal encounter. Stay tuned, because these real-life encounters will leave you speechless. In Anchorage, Alaska, at the Alaska Zoo, Kevin Dalton, a 28-year-old local, was known to have a troubled past. He had grown up in a quiet suburb of Anchorage, working at a car dealership. Although he seemed calm on the surface, those closest to him knew he struggled with anger management. His girlfriend, Megan Reed, was the complete opposite. At 26, she was bright, cheerful, and loved animals. She worked as a kindergarten teacher, adored by her students for her warm personality and kindness. They had been dating for about a year, and though things started well, their relationship worsened over time. Their differences often led to arguments, which grew more intense as the months passed. On that fateful day, Kevin and Megan had decided to visit the Alaska Zoo. The zoo was a popular spot, located in a beautiful wooded area just outside the city. It was known for its cold weather animals, especially the polar bears, which were a major attraction. Families, children, and tourists wandered around the exhibits, enjoying a sunny summer day in Anchorage. The zoo was filled with the sounds of excited kids and the distant roars of animals. The couple walked through the exhibits, but the tension between them was already noticeable. They had been arguing for weeks, and today it seemed like their conflict was boiling over. As they approached the polar bear enclosure, their argument reached a peak. Megan, upset and tired of the constant fights, tried to walk away from Kevin. But in a moment of heated rage, Kevin did something unimaginable. Without thinking, Kevin pushed Megan toward the edge of the polar bear enclosure. Megan stumbled and lost her balance, falling into the moat below. The fall was sudden, and a collective gasp rose from the crowd nearby. People froze in shock, unsure of what had just happened. Megan hit the cold water below, stunned and struggling to grasp the reality of what had occurred. The enclosure housed one of the zoo's most famous polar bears, a large male named Thor. The bear, noticing the sudden disturbance, turned his attention toward the water where Megan had fallen. The spectators, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, began yelling for help. Zoo staff were quickly alerted to the emergency, and the area around the enclosure was cleared. Thor slowly moved towards the edge of the moat, curious about the commotion. His large white body, towering over the water, seemed calm but alert. Polar bears, though slow on land, are excellent swimmers and hunters in their natural habitat. Every second felt like an eternity as Thor stood just a few feet from the water, where Megan struggled to stay afloat. The cold water of the enclosure moat was a stark reminder of the danger she was in. Kevin, watching from above, suddenly realized the weight of his actions. The rage that had blinded him was now replaced with overwhelming guilt. He knew he had made a terrible mistake. Without thinking twice, he leaped into the enclosure after Megan. As Kevin landed in the cold water of the moat, the shock hit him instantly. The freezing temperature made his muscles tense, and he struggled to keep his head above water. Megan was still panicking, trying to stay afloat as Thor, the polar bear, watched them closely. The bear had moved closer to the edge, and his large body cast a shadow over the water. Thor's deep black eyes locked onto the struggling couple. The crowd above, horrified by the unfolding scene, screamed for help. Zoo staff were rushing to the scene, bringing tranquilizers and food distractions in an attempt to save the two. The noise from the people and the sight of zookeepers approaching with food began to catch Thor's attention. The bear hesitated, torn between his natural curiosity and the smells coming from the food that had been thrown into the enclosure by the staff. As the bear stood still for a moment, zookeepers acted quickly. They tossed large chunks of meat into the far corner of the enclosure, hoping to lure Thor away from the water. The bear, sensing the familiar scent of food, turned toward the meat, giving Megan and Kevin a brief moment of safety. At the same time, other zookeepers prepared their tranquilizer guns. Thor, distracted by the food, began moving in the opposite direction, allowing the staff to get a clear shot. Within seconds, a tranquilizer dart struck Thor. The bear growled, but continued to move toward the food. The dart took some time to take effect, and everyone watched in silence as Thor slowed down, eventually lying down near the meat pile. As the situation with the bear was brought under control, another team of zookeepers quickly entered the enclosure to pull Megan and Kevin out of the freezing water. Both of them were shaking from the cold, and their movements were slow, their bodies affected by the shock and low temperature. The zookeepers grabbed them, helping them up and out of the enclosure. Megan was pulled out first, weak and barely able to stand. Kevin followed, his face pale with regret and exhaustion. The rescue team wrapped them both in blankets as they were rushed to the nearby emergency medical unit inside the zoo. Despite their condition, they were alive, rescued just in time before the situation could have taken a much darker turn. Later, both Megan and Kevin were treated for hypothermia at a local hospital in Anchorage. Physically, they recovered after a few days of rest, but the emotional impact would stay with them for much longer. The events of that day caused a huge stir in the local community. News of the incident spread quickly, and Kevin was soon facing serious charges of attempted murder. His actions were investigated thoroughly by the authorities, and he was taken into custody soon after his hospital discharge. A group of retirees embarked on a long-awaited hiking trip in Glacier National Park, Montana. The park, known for its stunning mountain views and diverse wildlife, was a favorite among outdoor enthusiasts. The group, made up of 6 seniors, had planned this hike for months, eager to experience the beauty of the park firsthand. Most of them were in their late 60s or early 70s, and while they were active for their age, hiking in such rugged terrain was still a challenge. Among the group was Mary Johnson, a retired teacher from Idaho who had a passion for nature photography. Her camera was always slung around her neck, ready to capture the beauty of the trail. Richard Evans, a former marathon runner from California, was the fittest of the group, though age had slowed him down in recent years. Then there was Betty and Frank Collins, a married couple from Seattle who had always enjoyed exploring national parks together. They moved at a slower pace, Frank using a walking stick to help steady himself. The youngest of the group, Linda Carter, was 66 and still recovering from knee surgery. She had taken up hiking as part of her physical therapy and was determined to keep up with the others. Finally, there was Harold Gray, an 80-year-old war veteran with a quiet strength and a deep love for adventure, despite his frail appearance. Leading the group was their experienced guide, Tom Matthews. At 45, Tom had spent most of his life in the outdoors, guiding hikers through the rugged trails of Glacier National Park. He was calm and knowledgeable, and had trained for situations involving the park's wildlife, particularly grizzly bears, which were common in the area. As they walked along a narrow mountain trail, Tom reminded the group to stay close together and make plenty of noise to avoid surprising any animals. The day had been perfect so far. The sun shone brightly over the peaks, and the group had been enjoying the views, stopping occasionally for pictures and water breaks. But as they rounded a bend in the trail, the mood shifted. Ahead, Tom spotted movement in the distance. A grizzly bear and her cubs were just a few yards away, grazing near the edge of the forest. Grizzly bears with cubs are extremely protective, and Tom knew that any sudden movement or noise could provoke the mother bear into charging. He immediately signaled for the group to stop. The retirees froze in place, their faces showing a mix of fear and confusion. Tom quietly motioned for them to back away slowly, trying to create distance without alarming the bear. The group began to move, but the trail was narrow, with loose gravel underfoot. The tension in the air was thick as they carefully took one step at a time, each person doing their best to remain calm. But then, disaster struck. As Tom took a step backward, his foot slipped on the loose gravel. He lost his balance and stumbled, kicking up small rocks that rolled down the slope. The sudden movement startled the grizzly mother, and in an instant her protective instincts took over. She reared up on her hind legs, letting out a deep, rumbling growl before dropping back to the ground and charging toward the group. The retirees, already on edge, panicked. Some tried to move faster, but their age and physical limitations made it difficult. Richard, the fittest of the group, managed to keep pace with Tom as they tried to lead the others to safety. However, for people like Frank, who relied on his walking stick, and Linda, with her recovering knee, retreating quickly was almost impossible. As the bear closed in, Tom realized they had only moments to act. As the grizzly bear charged, Tom Matthews knew he had to make a quick decision. His years of experience told him that the bear's aggression was driven by the instinct to protect her cubs, not by hunger. The retirees were frozen in fear, some struggling to move at all. Tom grabbed his bear spray, a canister he always carried for emergencies like this, and positioned himself between the bear and the hikers. The bear was getting closer with every second, her massive paws pounding the ground. Tom stood his ground, holding the bear spray in his hand, ready to use it as soon as the bear was within range. Richard, the former marathon runner, stayed nearby, helping guide the others. Frank, leaning heavily on his walking stick, moved as fast as he could, with Betty close behind him. Mary was shaking, clutching her camera tightly, and Linda, with her weak knee, was limping as fast as she could manage. Harold, though older than the others, kept his focus, pushing himself to keep moving. The grizzly bear came within a few feet, her large body charging forward, when Tom sprayed the bear spray into the air, aiming it directly at the bear's face. The powerful mist spread in front of the charging bear, hitting her nose and eyes. The bear stopped suddenly, shaking her head and snorting as the burning sensation from the spray hit her. She pawed at the air, growling in frustration, but the spray had done its job. The bear backed away, clearly uncomfortable, and began to retreat toward her cubs. Her growls echoed through the mountain trail as she returned to her young ones. Tom didn't relax yet. He motioned for the group to keep moving, knowing the bear might still be watching from the trees. The retirees hurried along the narrow trail, their hearts pounding, feeling the weight of what had just happened. They stayed together, moving slowly but steadily away from the area. Tom stayed at the back, watching the path behind them, ensuring the bear didn't follow. Eventually, they reached a safer, wider part of the trail, far enough from the bear's territory. Once they were safe, the group collapsed onto the rocks, breathing heavily from the fear and the effort of the escape. Tom checked on each hiker, making sure no one was hurt. Frank's leg was sore from pushing himself too hard with his walking stick, and Linda's knee was in pain, but otherwise the group was unharmed. They were shaken but alive. After the close encounter, the group's mood shifted. The retirees had come to Glacier National Park seeking adventure, but none had expected to face such a life-threatening situation. The reality of hiking in bear country had tested them in ways they hadn't imagined. Tom's quick thinking and use of the bear spray saved their lives, but the experience left them with a new understanding of the dangers of the wild. Alexei Volkov, a famous wildlife photographer, arrived in the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia. Known for his breathtaking close-up shots of animals in their natural habitats, Alexei had spent years building a reputation as one of the best in his field. His work had been featured in prestigious magazines, and his photos had won multiple awards. He had traveled all over the world, capturing stunning images of wild creatures, from lions in Africa to polar bears in the Arctic. But his passion for wildlife often led him to take risks, and it was this boldness that would ultimately be his downfall. The Kamchatka Peninsula is a wild, remote region in eastern Russia known for its volcanoes, rivers, and abundant wildlife. It is one of the few places in the world where Kamchatka brown bears, among the largest bears on Earth, roam freely. These massive creatures, weighing up to 700 kilograms, are often seen fishing in the rivers for salmon during the late summer months. For Alexei, this was a dream opportunity, a chance to capture the perfect shot of one of these majestic animals in its natural environment. Alexei had been to Kamchatka before and had worked with local guides who knew the land and the animals well. His guide on this trip, Ivan, had repeatedly stressed the importance of keeping a safe distance from the bears. The bears were unpredictable, especially when fishing, and could become aggressive if they felt threatened. Ivan, who had guided many photographers and wildlife researchers, knew the risks and always took precautions to avoid dangerous situations. But Alexei, eager to get the perfect shot, tended to push the limits. On that day in September, they had spotted a large Kamchatka brown bear fishing in a river. The bear was focused on catching salmon, its massive paws swiping at the fish as they swam upstream. Alexei and Ivan watched from a safe distance, with Ivan reminding Alexei not to get too close. But the photographer's desire for an up-close, dramatic image of the bear took over. Ignoring Ivan's warnings, Alexei edged closer to the bear's fishing spot, crouching low to the ground with his camera ready. He knew that getting the right angle, with the bear in full focus, would result in a stunning shot that could potentially win him another award. However, as he crept forward, the bear noticed his movement. The massive animal, irritated by the presence of a human so close to its territory, stood on its hind legs, towering over the landscape. At that moment, Alexei realized he had gone too far. The bear let out a low growl, its sharp eyes locked on Alexei. Before anyone could react, the bear dropped back onto all fours and charged toward him. Alexei's heart raced as he tried to scramble back, but in the chaos, his camera strap became tangled in his clothing. He struggled to free himself as the enormous bear closed the distance in seconds. The powerful animal was now just feet away, its massive body moving with terrifying speed. As the massive Kamchatka brown bear charged at Alexei, there was no time left to escape. He pulled frantically at the camera strap tangled around his clothes, but it wouldn't come loose. The more he struggled, the more entangled he became. The bear's growls grew louder as it closed in, its heavy paws pounding the earth beneath it. Alexei, now fully aware of the danger, tried to move, but his gear slowed him down. Ivan, the guide, stood a short distance away, desperately trying to distract the bear, waving his arms and shouting to draw the animal's attention, but the bear was focused solely on Alexei. The sounds of the rushing river and the heavy footfalls of the bear filled the air. Alexei knew that the animal was protecting its territory, reacting instinctively to what it saw as a threat. There was nothing Ivan could do to stop it. In a final desperate attempt to capture the moment, Alexei raised his camera, pointing it toward the charging bear. He pressed the shutter, snapping one last photo. The lens captured the open mouth of the bear, its teeth bared mere moments before the massive animal reached him. In that split second, nature's raw power was caught in Alexei's final image. The attack was brutal and swift. The bear's claws struck Alexei, knocking him to the ground. Ivan watched helplessly as the bear stood over Alexei, the photographer unable to move or fight back. The bear, after asserting its dominance, eventually retreated, leaving the scene as suddenly as it had entered. For the bear, it was not an act of malice, but a reaction to the intrusion. By the time Ivan reached Alexei, it was too late. The scene was silent, except for the distant sound of the river and the rustling of the trees. Ivan stood there in shock, knowing there was nothing he could have done to save him. He radioed for help, but deep down, he knew Alexei had already become another tragic reminder of the dangers of getting too close to nature's most powerful creatures. In the days that followed, news of Alexei Volkov's death spread quickly. His final photograph, recovered from the camera, was published posthumously, becoming a haunting symbol of the risks that come with capturing the beauty of wildlife. It was a chilling image of the bear's open mouth, frozen in time just before the fatal moment. The photo became famous, not for its artistic quality, but for the story behind it. The incident sparked widespread conversations about the dangers faced by wildlife photographers, especially those who, like Alexei, pushed the boundaries in pursuit of the perfect shot. The Kamchatka Peninsula, known for its wild beauty, now held a deeper, darker significance for those who knew the story. A traveling circus set up its tent in the quiet town of Saratov, Russia. The town was buzzing with excitement as families gathered for the show, eager to see the animals and performances. Among the crowd was a young girl named Alina Morozov, a bright and curious 6-year-old. She attended the circus with her parents, Pavel and Irina Morozov, who had promised her a special day out. Alina had always loved animals and was thrilled to see them up close, even though her parents had mixed feelings about the idea of animals performing in a circus. The circus had been traveling across Russia for months, performing in different cities. Its main attraction was Boris, a large Siberian brown bear. Boris had been with the circus for years, trained through harsh methods, and kept in chains for most of his life. He was mistreated by his trainer, Victor, a man with little regard for the animals under his care. To the audience, Boris appeared well-trained, performing tricks on command. But behind the scenes, he was a frustrated, angry animal pushed to his limit. The show began as usual, with bright lights and loud music filling the tent. The audience cheered as acrobats flipped through the air and clowns entertained the children. Alina sat on the edge of her seat, her eyes wide with excitement. When it was time for Boris to perform, Victor led the massive bear into the ring, holding onto a heavy chain that kept Boris under control. The bear moved slowly, following the commands of his trainer. But deep inside, Boris was reaching his breaking point. As Victor pushed Boris through his routine, the bear became more agitated. The crowd cheered loudly, unaware of the growing tension. Alina, sitting in the front row, watched closely, fascinated by the huge animal. Then something went wrong. Victor, frustrated by Boris's slow movements, pulled hard on the chain and struck the bear to make him move faster. That was the moment Boris snapped. With a sudden violent motion, Boris yanked the chain from Victor's hands and broke free. The massive bear reared up on his hind legs, letting out a roar that echoed through the tent. Panic spread instantly through the audience. People screamed and rushed toward the exits as the bear charged through the crowd, knocking over chairs and scattering people in every direction. In the chaos, Alina became separated from her parents. She was pushed by the crowd and lost sight of them as the tent filled with noise and fear. Confused and terrified, Alina found herself alone, standing in the middle of the circus ring as Boris moved closer. The bear, now free from his chain, looked massive and threatening as he approached the small girl. But something unexpected happened. Instead of showing aggression, Boris stopped in front of Alina, sniffing the air around her. The crowd had scattered, and it was just the girl and the bear in the center of the ring. Boris didn't attack. He simply stood there, looking at the child, calm in the midst of the chaos around him. As Boris stood in front of Alina, the entire circus tent seemed to hold its breath. The massive Siberian brown bear, free from his chains for the first time in years, showed no signs of aggression toward the small child. Instead, he appeared calm, almost protective. Alina, still frozen in fear, looked up at the bear towering over her. The crowd had cleared the area, leaving the two alone in the center of the ring. The sounds of panicked parents calling for their children and the distant sirens of approaching police filled the air. Victor, the bear's trainer, stood on the far side of the ring, staring at the scene in shock. For years, he had used cruel methods to control Boris, never seeing the animal as anything more than a tool for entertainment. Now, faced with the reality of the situation, Victor knew that his actions had driven the bear to this breaking point. Yet, there was no clear plan for how to resolve this moment without causing harm to either Boris or the innocent girl. Outside the tent, animal control officers and police had arrived, surrounding the circus. The media quickly picked up the story, broadcasting live images of the escaped bear standing with the young girl. The entire country watched anxiously as experts debated how to handle the situation without resorting to violence. The fear was real. One wrong move could result in tragedy. Inside the tent, Victor was forced to confront the reality of his treatment of Boris. He knew that if he approached aggressively, the bear might become defensive. He also knew that tranquilizing the bear could take too long and might make Boris unpredictable. Victor had no choice but to try something different. Slowly, Victor approached the ring, careful not to make any sudden movements. Boris's ears perked up as he noticed his former handler moving closer. The bear stayed calm, continuing to stand near Alina, who hadn't moved. Victor had never seen Boris act like this before, and for the first time he realized how wrong he had been in mistreating the bear all these years. There was a gentleness in Boris's behavior toward the child, something Victor never expected from an animal he had only ever viewed as dangerous. As Victor edged closer, the bear remained still. The officers outside prepared to take action if necessary, but Victor knew that Boris would react badly to any aggressive intervention. He signaled for them to wait. With quiet determination, Victor took a deep breath and walked into the ring. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of food, holding it out to Boris in an attempt to distract him. The bear slowly turned away from Alina and sniffed the air, drawn by the familiar scent. Taking cautious steps, Victor led Boris away from the center of the ring and toward the edge of the tent, where a large enclosure awaited him. Once Boris was inside the enclosure, the officers moved in to secure the area. Alina, still shaken but unharmed, was quickly reunited with her frantic parents. The crowd, which had watched in stunned silence, began to applaud as the tense situation came to an end without harm. In the days that followed, the incident became a national story. The footage of Boris and Alina in the ring was played on news channels across the world, sparking intense discussions about the treatment of animals in circuses. Animal rights groups pushed for stronger regulations, while the public questioned the ethics of keeping wild creatures in captivity for entertainment. Victor, deeply affected by what had happened, decided to leave the circus. He could no longer justify the life he had led, and he knew that Boris's actions had shown a side of animals he had never understood. Boris was relocated to a wildlife sanctuary where he would live the rest of his days free from chains, a symbol of both the power and the grace of the wild. Dr. Sarah Chen stood inside the remote Arctic research station located on Wrangel Island, off the coast of northern Russia. The station, built to study climate change and its effects on the polar ecosystem, was isolated and surrounded by ice and snow. Sarah, a 35-year-old marine biologist, had been leading the team of researchers for the past year, working tirelessly to collect data on the rapidly melting sea ice. The crew consisted of 5 experts: Emily, a climatologist from Canada; Pavel, a Russian wildlife specialist; Marcus, an engineer from Germany; Anita, a medical officer from Sweden; and Samir, a logistics expert from India. Together, they had survived the harsh Arctic winter, but now, as the days grew darker and colder, a new threat loomed. The sea ice, which the polar bears relied on for hunting, had been melting at an alarming rate. With fewer opportunities to catch seals, the starving bears had begun moving inland in search of food. The station's food stores, packed with supplies for the researchers, had become an irresistible target for the hungry animals. For days, Sarah and her team had watched from inside as polar bears circled the facility, testing the station's defenses, growing bolder with each passing day. The team had prepared for the usual challenges of Arctic research: extreme cold, isolation, and the unpredictability of the environment, but no one had anticipated this. The bears had begun to claw at the outer walls of the station, attracted by the scent of food. The thick metal doors held, but the tension among the researchers was rising. Every day the bears seemed to grow more determined, and the team's supplies were running low. They had been careful with rations, but it was clear they would need to resupply soon if they were to last the winter. However, the situation reached a critical point. One of the station's storage rooms, where most of their food was kept, had been damaged by the bears during the night. They would have to venture outside to repair it, a dangerous task with the bears still lurking nearby. Dr. Chen, aware of the risks, reluctantly agreed that they had no other choice. Samir, the logistics expert, volunteered to go with Marcus to assess the damage and attempt to fix the outer structure. Equipped with thick winter gear and a flare gun for protection, they stepped outside into the freezing Arctic wind. The snow crunched beneath their boots as they made their way toward the storage unit. Inside the station, Sarah and the others watched nervously from the small windows, praying the bears wouldn't appear. But suddenly, from behind a nearby snowdrift, a large polar bear emerged, its white fur blending into the icy landscape. It moved quickly toward Samir, who had been working on the repairs. In a flash, the bear was upon him, its powerful body knocking him to the ground. Marcus scrambled to help, firing the flare gun into the air, the bright light cutting through the overcast sky. The bear hesitated for a moment, distracted by the flare, but the danger was far from over. As the flare burned brightly in the sky, the polar bear paused, momentarily distracted by the sudden burst of light. Samir, lying on the ground, scrambled to get away, his hands sinking into the thick snow. Marcus, still holding the flare gun, tried to wave the bear off, but the massive creature's attention quickly returned to the fallen researcher. The bear, driven by hunger, stepped closer, its massive paws crushing the snow beneath it. Inside the research station, Dr. Sarah Chen and the others watched in horror through the small window. Every second felt like an eternity. Sarah knew they had little time to act. The station had emergency procedures in place, but those seemed distant and ineffective now as the bear stood just feet away from Samir. Sarah grabbed a second flare gun and handed it to Emily, urging her to be ready to help. They both rushed outside, the bitter cold biting at their faces as they stepped into the swirling Arctic wind. The bear's growls were low and deep, and its sheer size was terrifying as it loomed over Samir. Sarah fired her flare into the air, the light once again catching the bear's attention. This time, the flare seemed to do the trick. The bear hesitated, its black eyes blinking in confusion, before turning away slowly, lumbering off into the white wilderness. The threat was over, but only for now. Marcus rushed to help Samir to his feet, checking for any injuries. He had been lucky, just a few scratches from the fall, but nothing serious. The group quickly gathered their supplies and retreated into the safety of the station, slamming the heavy door shut behind them. Inside, the mood was tense and quiet. The bears had become more aggressive, and the researchers knew it was only a matter of time before the animals returned. Over the next few hours, Sarah gathered her team to discuss their next steps. The bears had damaged their food storage, and supplies were running dangerously low. They were cut off from the rest of the world with no help in sight due to the harsh Arctic winter. Their radios were unreliable, and rescue seemed unlikely anytime soon. The realization weighed heavily on the group. Despite the fear and fatigue, Sarah knew they couldn't give up. She organized the team to reinforce the damaged storage area and secure what little food they had left. Marcus worked tirelessly to repair the structure, using whatever materials they had on hand. Pavel monitored the perimeter, using binoculars to watch for any signs of the bears returning. Every move was calculated and every decision was critical. In the days that followed, the bears remained near the station, testing its defenses but keeping their distance. The researchers, worn out but determined, focused on survival. They rationed their food carefully, stretched their supplies, and kept the bears at bay with the few remaining flares they had. Dr. Sarah Chen and her team completed their research, but the experience left them with a deep understanding of the fragile balance between humans and nature in the Arctic. They eventually made it through the winter, rescued months later by a supply team, but the memory of those desperate days stayed with them long after they left the icy wilderness behind. The Thompson family was enjoying a quiet evening in their mountain home near Estes Park, Colorado. Mike Thompson, a 42-year-old outdoorsman, had chosen to live in the peaceful mountain town with his wife Ellen and their two children, 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Jack. They had moved there a few years earlier, drawn to the natural beauty of the area and the serenity it offered. Mike worked as a park ranger, and Ellen was a freelance graphic designer who worked from home. The house, tucked away in the forest, gave them a sense of freedom and connection to nature. However, that night, their peaceful life would be shattered. The family had just finished dinner, the smell of roast chicken still lingering in the air as they settled into their evening routine. Ellen was cleaning up in the kitchen while Mike helped the kids with their homework upstairs. The windows were open to let in the cool mountain breeze, and everything seemed calm. But just as Mike was tucking the children into bed, a loud crash echoed from downstairs. The sound of glass breaking ripped through the stillness, sending a wave of fear through the house. Mike quickly told the kids to stay in their room as he rushed down the stairs. When he reached the landing, his heart sank. A large black bear had broken through the sliding glass door in the kitchen. Shards of glass covered the floor, and the bear was already rummaging through the cabinets, knocking things over in search of food. The bear, likely drawn by the scent of their dinner, was now inside the house. Mike knew immediately that they were in danger. Black bears were common in the area, but rarely did they break into homes. This one, however, was big and bold, and it showed no fear as it tore apart the kitchen. Mike backed up the stairs, trying to think quickly. Ellen, hearing the noise, ran to him, panic in her eyes. The kids were still upstairs, and there was no way out without going past the bear. The windows were too high to climb through safely, and the front door was blocked by the bear's path through the house. Trapped, the family had no choice but to stay upstairs and hope the bear wouldn't come further. But the bear wasn't satisfied with the kitchen. After knocking over pots, pans, and dishes, the bear turned its attention to the stairs. Mike heard the heavy footsteps as the animal moved through the living room and toward the second floor. The bear's thick fur brushed against the walls, its breath heavy and loud in the quiet house. Mike knew it was coming for more, and now the only thing between the family and the bear was a short flight of stairs. As the bear began to climb, Mike quickly grabbed a baseball bat from his son's room. He positioned himself at the top of the stairs, ready to defend his family with whatever he had on hand. Ellen, shaking with fear, struggled to get a signal on her cell phone, desperately trying to call for help. The situation was growing more desperate with every second. As the bear continued to climb the stairs, its heavy paws thudding on the wooden steps, Mike braced himself. He tightened his grip on the baseball bat, the only thing he could find to defend his family. The animal was getting closer, and the fear in the air was thick. Mike could hear the children in their room huddled together in silence, sensing the danger without fully understanding it. Ellen, still trying to get a signal on her phone, paced back and forth near the window, her hands shaking as she pressed the phone against her ear. The bear's head appeared at the top of the stairs. It was massive, its dark eyes scanning the hallway. The scent of food from earlier must have still been strong in the bear's mind, and it seemed determined to find more. Mike stood his ground, the bear now fully on the upper floor, only a few feet away from where he stood. Mike swung the bat at the bear, aiming for its shoulder, hoping to scare it back down the stairs. The bear reacted, backing up slightly, but it wasn't enough to deter it for long. It growled deeply, the sound echoing through the narrow hallway. Mike knew he couldn't win a fight with a bear, but he had to keep it away from the children and Ellen. He swung again, harder this time, striking the bear's side. The animal growled louder, but it didn't retreat. Ellen, in a desperate attempt to do something, opened the window wide, hoping the cold night air would distract the bear or draw it outside. The wind blew in, rattling the curtains, but the bear stayed focused on the hallway. Just as things seemed hopeless, a loud crash from downstairs startled the bear. It turned its head sharply toward the noise. The bear, sensing that something was happening in the kitchen where it had first entered, suddenly lost interest in the upstairs and turned around. It lumbered back down the stairs, leaving Mike standing there, still gripping the bat tightly. The family waited, holding their breath, as the bear made its way out through the shattered sliding glass door, disappearing into the dark forest beyond. They didn't move until they were sure the bear was gone. After the bear had left, Mike and Ellen quickly gathered the children, bringing them downstairs to assess the damage. The kitchen was a mess, with broken glass and scattered food everywhere. The sliding door was destroyed, and the cold mountain air was blowing through the house. But the family was safe, and that was all that mattered. In the days that followed, the Thompsons cleaned up the wreckage and repaired their home. The local authorities came out to inspect the scene and advised the family on how to secure their property in the future better. Bears were common in the area, but this attack had shaken the entire community. The aftermath of the incident left a lasting impression on the Thompsons. They had always respected the wildlife around their home, but this experience reminded them how unpredictable and dangerous nature could be. Mike had acted bravely to protect his family, and they knew how lucky they were to have escaped unharmed. The story of the bear's home invasion spread through Estes Park, a reminder to all the residents that living in the wilderness required constant vigilance. The Thompson family, though shaken, continued to live in their mountain home, now with an even deeper respect for the powerful creatures that roamed the woods around them.